They laughed when the rich man handed that frail gray horse to a poor boy, calling it a joke, a curse, a waste of breath. But in a town where pride ruled and kindness froze beneath the snow, no one saw what was coming. That the horse meant to shame the boy would one day teach them all what it means to believe again. The first snow had just begun to fall over Jackson Hole, dusting the roofs and fences of the quiet mountain town in pale white. In the middle of the square, lanterns swayed in the sharp wind as townsfolk gathered for the winter fair, a place where pride was shown off like trophies and money had the loudest laugh. At the center stood Elias Brandt, the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties, his fur coat dusted with flakes that never dared melt on him. He held a silver flask and a cruel smile as his eyes fell upon a boy standing at the edge of the crowd. The boy's name was Noah Carter, 17, lanky, quiet, his boots patched, his coat several winters old. He was there not to celebrate, but to watch, maybe to learn. His mother was homesick, and every dollar he earned from mucking stalls went to medicine and firewood. Still, he had that glimmer in his eyes, the kind that made cruel men itch to crush it. "Come here, boy," Elias called, his voice booming through the cold. The laughter of the crowd hushed into curiosity. Noah hesitated, then stepped forward, hat in hand. Elias gestured, and 2 ranch hands dragged out a horse from behind the wagons. Gasps rippled through the air. The animal limped badly, its ribs showing through a dull gray coat. One eye was clouded white, the other full of something that looked too much like shame. "This one's for you," Elias said, clapping Noah on the shoulder with mock generosity. "You've been asking to learn horses, haven't you? Well, here's your chance." The laughter that followed wasn't kind. A woman covered her mouth. A man slapped his knee. Someone muttered, "That horse couldn't pull a sled, let alone work." Noah's ears burned crimson. He tried to form words, but his throat was tight. The wind carried the scent of smoke and hay, and for a second he thought of his mother's thin hands trembling near the fire. "Thank you, Mr. Brandt," he managed, the words shaking like dry leaves. Elias chuckled. "Don't thank me too soon, son. That nag's older than your mother and twice as useless." The crowd roared again. But just then, something broke the laughter. The horse lifted its head. Its one good eye met Noah's, and everything else went quiet. There was no sound, no breath, only the soundless conversation between 2 beings no one else could hear. That single gaze, proud, weary, defiant, cut through the cold like light through fog. Noah stepped forward, his boots sinking into the snow, and took the rope. The horse trembled, but didn't pull away. Around them, the laughter rose again, sharper this time, desperate to fill the silence they had just created. Elias smirked, satisfied, and turned to toast his friends. Noah tugged gently on the rope. "Come on," he whispered. The horse followed. Each step left a small crater in the snow, the limp growing heavier the farther they walked from the square. Behind them, the town's laughter faded, swallowed by the wind. Ahead, the sky deepened into the kind of gray that promised another storm. By the time Noah reached the edge of the woods, the lantern light from town had vanished. The horse stumbled once, nearly falling, and Noah reached out instinctively, steadying it. His hands brushed the animal's neck, cold, damp, trembling. The moment stretched, fragile, almost sacred. "You're not done yet," he murmured. When they reached the tiny cabin he called home, The windows glowed weakly from a single oil lamp. His mother, Martha Carter, stood in the doorway wrapped in a shawl that couldn't hide her frailty. Her face, lined and pale, fell when she saw the creature beside her son. "Lord, Noah," she whispered, "where did that poor thing come from?" "Mr. Brant gave him to me," Noah replied, his breath fogging in the cold. "Gave?" Her tone was sharp, heavy with disbelief. "Elias Brant doesn't give anything that doesn't hurt someone first." Noah lowered his gaze, but said nothing. He untied the rope and led the horse to the side of the barn. The boards creaked, the roof sagged, but it would keep the snow off. He spread old blankets and hay, then stepped back, watching as the horse lowered its head to sniff the ground before settling down with a long, weary sigh. Inside, the cabin smelled of smoke and damp wood. Martha coughed softly, stirring the stew on the small stove. "That man's got a mean streak," she said, voice low. "He'll use your hope to humiliate you." Noah nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere, on that single, haunted eye. "He's not what they think," he said quietly. "He's just tired." His mother shook her head. "So are you." Later, long after she had fallen asleep, Noah slipped outside again. The night was still. Snowflakes drifted in slow spirals under the thin glow of the moon. The horse, the gift meant to shame him, stood watching, breath rising like smoke. Noah moved closer. "I'll call you Ashen," he said softly, "like the color of what's left after the fire." The horse's ear twitched. A sound came, not a whinny, not quite a sigh, but something alive, something aware. For the first time that day, Noah smiled. He reached out a hand, resting it against the rough, cold coat. "Tomorrow," he whispered, "we'll start over." The horse didn't move. It only breathed. Slow, steady, the rhythm of endurance. Behind them, the mountains loomed, silent and eternal. The wind carried the faint echo of laughter from town, already fading into nothing. Noah tightened the blanket over Ashen's back and stepped closer until his forehead brushed the animal's neck. His voice, when it came, was barely a breath. "They think we're broken." Snow fell harder, and the world turned white around them. The horse's warm breath touched his cheek. "Let's prove them wrong." And as the night deepened over the frozen valley, the boy and the horse stood together in the cold. Two outcasts beneath the same indifferent sky, bound not by pity, but by the quiet spark of something far rarer. The wind clawed at the shutters all night, making the cabin moan like an old ship lost at sea. By morning, the sky had cleared to a bruised shade of blue, and frost glazed every window pane. Noah woke to the sound of soft coughing from the next room, and the smell of wood smoke too faint to chase away the cold. He pulled on his boots, cracked at the heel, and stepped outside. The snow had crusted hard overnight, crunching beneath his feet. In the lean-to beside the barn, Ashen stood motionless, steam rising from his nostrils like prayers that never reached heaven. Noah set down a tin bucket and filled it with what water hadn't frozen solid. "Morning, old boy," he whispered. The horse lifted its head, one cloudy eye unfocused, the other watching him with something that wasn't fear, more like endurance worn thin. Noah touched the coarse mane, fingers stiff from cold. He'd read once, in an old rancher's journal he found behind the church, that animals remember kindness longer than cruelty. He hoped it was true. He brushed off what flakes he could from Ashen's coat, layer by layer, until the dull gray began to show the faintest shimmer beneath. Every few strokes, he stopped to rest his arm, his breath fogging in the air. When the wind shifted, the smell of hay and old earth rose from the floorboards, a smell that reminded him of summers long gone, before his father's accident, before his mother's quiet sickness. Inside the cabin, his mother moved slowly, ladling weak coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. "You'll freeze to death out there," she called through the open door. "I've been colder," he said, smiling faintly. Martha Carter leaned against the doorway, her shawl drawn close, eyes fixed on the horse outside. "You mean to fix him, don't you?" Noah shrugged. "He's still breathing. That's enough for a start." She shook her head, a small, sad smile touching her lips. "Your father used to say the same thing about people." When she turned back inside, Noah crouched by Ashen's leg. The horse shifted, favoring its left side. A long, pale scar traced the muscle there, old, but deep. Whoever owned him before hadn't cared much about healing. Noah traced the edge of the mark gently, whispering, "What happened to you?" Ashen didn't move. The only answer came from the soft hiss of wind slipping through the boards. By afternoon, the sky turned a pale silver, the kind of light that made shadows disappear. Noah hitched a small sled to his belt and trudged into town for supplies. Every step was work. At the feed store, old Mr. Hanson squinted at him from behind the counter. "You again?" he said, his tone not unkind. "Heard you're keeping Brant's ghost horse." Noah counted out the few coins he had. "Just need grain, the cheap kind." Hanson grunted, scooping from the bin. "Word is that animal's cursed. You best watch your luck." "I don't believe in curses," Noah said, though his voice trembled a little. "Then you've never met Elias Brant." The old man slid the sack across the counter. "He's been cursed since his wife died. Folks say that horse was there, left her buried in the snow." Noah froze, the words hanging like smoke in the cold air. "He told you that?" "Didn't have to," Hanson said. "Whole town knows. That's why he keeps the animal penned up, starving. He couldn't stand the sight of it." The bell above the door jingled as Noah left. Outside, the streets were quiet. The weight of the feed pulled at his shoulders, but the weight of the story pressed harder. He walked faster, the thought of the horse alone in that lean-to pushing him through the snow. Back home, the wind had picked up again, rattling the roof. Ashen greeted him with a snort, breath clouding the dim light. Noah poured a small pile of grain into a tin bowl and watched as the horse lowered its head, chewing slow and steady, as if relearning the act of trust. The rhythmic crunch of feed was the only sound, soothing in its repetition. When dusk came, the valley filled with fog. The mountains blurred into ghosts. Noah lit the lantern and set it near the stall. The golden light made the frost on the boards sparkle like tiny stars. He sat beside Ashen, legs crossed, back to the cold wall. "Mr. Brant thinks you failed him," Noah said softly. "But you didn't, did you?" Ashen's ears flicked toward him. "You just got left behind, like the rest of us." Somewhere deep in the horse's chest came a low rumble, half sigh, half groan, that vibrated through the still air. Noah smiled, barely. "Guess that makes 2 of us." Later, when the fire in the cabin had gone to embers, Noah slipped back outside once more. The stars were sharp above the ridges, clear and cold. He pressed his hand against Ashen's neck. The skin was warmer now, the trembling gone. "I don't have much to give," he murmured, "but I'll give what I can." He leaned his forehead against the horse's side, listening to the slow thud of its heart. It sounded like distant thunder under layers of snow, a rhythm that said, "Still here, still alive." When he finally turned toward the door, Ashen lifted his head, ears pricked, as if to follow. "Tomorrow," Noah said. "We'll go farther. Maybe see what you remember." The horse snorted softly, a cloud of steam rising between them. Inside, the cabin's lantern flickered low, casting their shadows long against the white ground, the boy and the broken horse, two silhouettes stitched together by need and something quieter than hope. That night, the cold deepened, but for the first time since the winter fair, Noah slept without waking from the sound of laughter in his dreams. Outside, Ashen shifted once in his stall, then stilled, his breath slow and even. The storm clouds gathered again over the peaks, hiding the stars. And though the world was buried in silence, the boy and the horse had begun something small, something no one else would see coming. 3 days passed before the snow softened enough for anyone to travel the valley roads again. The drifts had piled knee-deep in the lowlands, and the air burned the lungs with every breath. Noah spent his mornings chopping wood and his afternoons tending to Ashen, each day learning more about the animal's quiet rhythms, the slight tremor in his leg when he shifted weight, the way his good eye tracked every sound beyond the door, the subtle lift of his ears when Noah spoke softly. The connection between them had grown in silence, not words. That morning, Noah was in the barn repairing a broken latch when he heard the crunch of boots on frost. A voice called from beyond the fence line, rough, carrying a drawl that sounded older than the mountains. "Boy, you the one took Brant's gray horse?" Noah turned. A tall, stooped man stood at the gate, a carved oak cane in one hand and a pipe in the other. His face was lined like bark, wind-worn and familiar somehow. The man's eyes, pale as thawing ice, studied Noah for a long moment before sliding toward the stall. "I'm Ben Harper," he said, tapping his cane against the snow. "Used to work search and rescue up the North Ridge before my knees gave out." Noah hesitated. "Yes, sir. He's mine now, I guess." Ben stepped closer, each move deliberate, respectful, the way men approach wild things. When he reached the stall, he leaned on the cane and exhaled a slow stream of smoke. "Well, I'll be damned," he murmured. "That horse still breathin'." Noah frowned. "You know him?" Ben nodded, the lines in his face tightening. "Knew him back when he wasn't gray all over. Name wasn't Ashen then. Folks called him Sundown. He belonged to a rescue team out of Teton Pass. Strongest animal I ever worked with. Pulled 3 miners out of a snow cave one winter. I thought he was dead." Ashen turned his head, the clouded eye catching a sliver of light. For a breath, the old man and the horse just looked at each other. Then Ben stepped closer, letting his hand hover near the animal's muzzle. Ashen sniffed the air and released a low rumble from deep in his chest, a sound that might have been memory. "You see that scar?" Ben said quietly. "That happened the night of the Brant avalanche. Mrs. Brant got trapped up there. I was part of the crew that found what was left of her camp. The horse had dragged himself halfway down the ridge, torn up bad. No one thought he'd made it that far alone. Noah swallowed hard. Elias Brandt thinks this horse left her. Ben's gaze snapped toward him, sharp as a hawk's. That man's been drinking his own bitterness too long to see straight. From what I saw, this animal tried to go back into the slide more than once. The foreman had to tie him down to keep him from killing himself in the snow. For a while, neither spoke. The only sound was the ticking of melting ice on the roof. Then Ben sighed. Funny thing about animals, they remember everything. They don't forgive easy, but they don't forget love neither. He dug into his coat pocket and pulled out a small tin of salve, edges rusted. Made this myself, old rescue trick, pine resin, tallow, and a little cedar oil. Rub it into that leg every night. Might ease the ache. Noah took the tin, the metal cold against his palm. Why help me? Because that horse earned better than what he got, Ben said simply. And because you remind me of a boy I once trained, always looking for something worth saving. They worked in silence for the next hour. Ben showed Noah how to test the muscle, how to wrap the bandage without cutting off the blood. Ashen stood still the entire time, trusting the old man's touch. When they were done, Ben wiped his hands on his coat and looked out toward the ridge. Storm's coming again tomorrow, he said. Best keep him sheltered. Don't let Brandt or his men catch sight of you. That man's pride is meaner than hunger. Noah nodded. I can handle him. Ben's mouth twisted into something like a smile. Son, pride like that don't fight fair, but you got heart. Sometimes that's worse. He turned toward the gate, cane sinking deep in the snow. I'll be back when the roads thaw. Keep that animal warm. After the old man disappeared into the white, Noah returned to the stall. Ashen shifted, testing the wrapped leg. The faint smell of cedar rose in the air. The boy sat down beside him, holding the tin between his hands, as if it were something sacred. Guess you had another name once, he said. Sundown? Sounds like you belonged to someone good. The horse blew a warm breath that misted over Noah's fingers. Outside, the sun was sinking behind the ridge, painting the valley in rose and gray. The color reminded Noah of the scar on Ashen's flank, old hurt beneath fading light. When he stepped back into the cabin, his mother was by the window, watching the snow drift across the glass. Who was that man? She asked. Someone who remembers things others want to forget. She studied his face for a moment, then turned back to the fire. Be careful, Noah. People don't like old ghosts being stirred. He didn't answer. That night, while the storm began to whisper in the mountains again, he sat beside Ashen, rubbing the salve into the scar until the smell of cedar filled the barn. With each slow stroke, the horse's muscles loosened, his breathing deepened, and Noah felt the strange calm that comes when trust begins to grow from broken ground. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the distant cry of coyotes. Noah looked toward the ridge where Ben had disappeared and wondered how many truths lay buried beneath the snow, truths that could shatter a man or set him free. He pressed his hand against Ashen's neck. We'll find out together, he whispered. The horse turned his head slightly, enough for the boy to feel the soft brush of breath against his sleeve. For the first time since the winter fair, the silence between them didn't feel empty. It felt like a promise. The snow had turned soft again, sinking underfoot like sifted flour. The air smelled of smoke and wet pine. Noah trudged the mile toward Brandt Ranch, his breath rising in steady bursts. He had promised his mother he'd barter firewood for flour, but what he needed most wasn't food. It was hay for Ashen. The feed he'd bought was running low, and the storm had buried half the valley roads. When he reached the ranch, the wide yard stood empty except for a few grazing horses under the shed roof. The Brandt house loomed at the far end, its windows lit with the amber glow of oil lamps, the kind of warmth Noah hadn't felt since childhood. He hesitated at the gate, snow creaking beneath his boots, until the side door opened and a woman's voice called out, "You looking for someone?" Noah turned. A girl in a wool coat and riding boots stood on the porch. Her hair, the color of corn husks, was pulled into a braid that fell over one shoulder. She wasn't much older than him, maybe 18. "I came to see about getting some hay," Noah said, keeping his cap low. "Just a few bales. I'll work for it if I have to." The girl's eyes softened. "You're the boy from the fair, the one with my father's horse." Her voice trembled slightly on that word. Horse. "I guess that's me," he said. She walked closer, boots crunching in the snow. "You shouldn't be here. My father he won't like it." "I'll be quick." Something flickered in her expression. Curiosity, maybe pity. Then she nodded toward the barn. "2 bales by the door. Take them and go before he comes back from town." Noah pulled the rope loose and stacked the bales on a sled outside. When he looked back toward the house, the girl hadn't moved. She was watching him with that same uneasy mix of fear and gratitude. "Thank you," he said. Her gaze dropped to the ground. "You gave him a name, didn't you?" Ashen. Her lips parted slightly, as if the word had struck some deep chord. "My mother used to say that word. Ashen. Said it was the color of the sky before snow." Noah hesitated. She knew him, didn't she? The horse. The girl's throat worked before she spoke. She did. He was hers. She glanced toward the house again. "I have to go." But as she turned away, Noah saw the faint shimmer of tears at the corner of her eyes. Back home, he stacked the hay in the barn, the scent of dried grass filling the space. Ashen raised his head, ears pricked forward. "Brought you dinner," Noah said, pulling off his gloves. The horse nickered softly, brushing his muzzle against the boy's sleeve. Noah smiled, but his thoughts were still back at the ranch. The girl's voice, the way she said, he was hers. 2 days later, when his mother's cough worsened and he needed medicine, Noah returned to the Brandt property. He knocked on the kitchen door this time, meaning only to ask for credit at the store. No one answered, so he stepped inside the mudroom and called out. The silence was heavy, broken only by the ticking of a wall clock somewhere deeper in the house. "Hello?" The sound of his own voice startled him. He moved slowly down the narrow hallway, the air faintly perfumed with lilac soap. Through an open doorway, he saw a parlor lined with framed photographs. Men on horseback, hunting dogs, women in long skirts frozen in time. But one picture drew him closer. It sat on the mantel above the cold hearth. A woman with kind eyes, standing beside a gray horse, her gloved hand resting on its neck. Even through the faded glass, the animal's shape was unmistakable. The same slope of the shoulder, the same scar faintly visible near the flank. Ashen. Before the years, before the storm. Noah's fingers brushed the frame, leaving a print in the dust. Beautiful, wasn't she? He turned. The girl from before stood at the doorway, her hands clasped tight around a folded shawl. "I'm sorry," he stammered. "I shouldn't." "It's all right," she said quietly. "That was my mother," Eliza Brandt. And yes, the horse beside her was Ashen, though back then we called him Stormlight. She saved him from an auction, said he had a calm spirit, like the sea after a storm. Noah looked back at the photograph. He saved her too, didn't he? During the avalanche? The girl's eyes dimmed. That's not what my father believes. He says the horse bolted, left her to die. But he didn't, Noah said. An old rescue worker told me. He tried to go back. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then the girl whispered, I knew it. She stepped closer, her breath trembling. I knew my mother wouldn't have loved a coward's horse. She wiped her eyes, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a small tin box. Inside were a few brushes, a worn bridle, and a folded ribbon the color of storm clouds. These were hers. I've kept them hidden since she died. Take them, use them for him. Maybe he'll remember. Noah shook his head. Your father doesn't come in here anymore. She pressed the box into his hands. He says this room belongs to ghosts. Noah opened his mouth to thank her, but the sound of heavy boots on the porch made them both freeze. My father's back, she whispered. Go. Through the kitchen door. Now. He slipped out the back as the front door opened. The cold air hit him like a slap. He ran until the light of the Brandt house was swallowed by snow. When he reached the cabin, he opened the box by lantern light. The brushes smelled faintly of lavender. He ran one through Ashen's mane. Careful. Reverent. The horse's eye softened, lids drooping as if the touch awakened an old dream. Noah brushed until the gray gleamed faintly in the lamplight. Then he tied the ribbon gently around the halter. She loved you, he murmured, and you didn't fail her. Ashen exhaled, a sound halfway between a sigh and a song. Outside, the wind began to rise, whistling through the cracks in the barn wall. Inside, under that thin yellow light, the boy and the horse stood wrapped in the same quiet understanding. A bridge across time, grief, and everything that had been taken from them. In the distance, thunder rolled low over the mountains, though the sky held no lightning yet. A storm was coming, and with it, the past that refused to stay buried. The next morning broke hard and gray, the kind of day that never really wakes. Snow had fallen again overnight, thick enough to blur the shapes of fences and trees. Noah shoveled a narrow path from the cabin to the barn, his arms aching, breath cutting white ribbons in the cold air. Ashen waited near the door, head low but alert, the ribbon Clara had given him still tied at the halter, like a whisper of another life. Noah worked in silence, the rhythm of his shovel steady against the wind. His mind kept drifting to the night before, the photograph, Clara's trembling voice, the soft gleam in Ashen's eye when he felt the brush on his coat. There was something heavy in that memory, something both beautiful and dangerous. He didn't notice the crunch of boots behind him until a shadow fell across the snow. Well, a voice said, rough and cold, looks like my charity's still on its feet. Noah froze. Elias Brandt stood at the edge of the yard, wrapped in a dark coat, his breath curling like smoke. The man's face was red from wind and whiskey, eyes sharp as broken glass. I didn't expect, Noah began. Didn't expect I'd come checking up on what's mine? Elias stepped closer, his gloved hand resting on the handle of his riding crop. You think because I threw that bag of bones your way, you get to play hero? Noah swallowed hard, forcing calm. He's just a horse, sir. I'm trying to help him. Help him? Elias laughed, short and bitter. That animal doesn't deserve help. He left my wife to die on the mountain. Ashen lifted his head at the sound of the man's voice, a tremor running through him. Noah stepped between them, instinctively shielding the horse. You're wrong, he said quietly. Elias's gaze snapped toward him. What did you say? Noah hesitated, the wind tearing at his coat. I said you're wrong. He tried to save her. The rescue man, Ben Harper, he told me. The horse came back down half dead. For a heartbeat, silence stretched thin as ice. Then Elias's voice dropped, low and dangerous. You don't know a damn thing, boy. Don't you dare speak her name to me. Noah's pulse hammered in his throat. You can hate me if you want, but don't hate him for what he couldn't stop. Elias's hand tightened on the riding crop. You've got a smart mouth for someone who eats off my land. You think a few soft words make you a savior? That horse is cursed. He should have been put down years ago. Ashen shifted, a low sound building deep in his chest. Not fear, but warning. His one good eye burned dark and steady. The ribbon fluttered in the wind like a small defiance. Elias raised the crop, and without thinking, Noah caught it mid-air. Their eyes locked, the boy's grip white-knuckled against the man's strength. For a moment, the wind itself seemed to pause, waiting for what would break first. Then Elias jerked the crop free and threw it into the snow. His voice came out rough, cracking at the edges. You've got her same stubborn streak. Her and that damn horse. You'll end up buried for it, too. He turned, trudging toward his wagon, shoulders hunched against the storm. Noah stood watching until the sound of hooves faded into the wind. Inside the barn, the air was warm and heavy with the scent of hay. Noah leaned against the door, heart still pounding. He doesn't see it, he murmured. He doesn't see what you are. Ashen pressed his muzzle to Noah's shoulder, breathing slow, steady. The touch grounded him, quieted the tremor in his hands. That night, the storm hit harder than anyone expected. The wind screamed through the valley, rattling the shutters and bending the pine trees until their trunks groaned. Noah stacked wood inside the house, then ran back to the barn to check the doors. The snow came sideways, stinging his face like sand. Inside, Ashen paced, restless. Every few minutes, he would stop and lift his head toward the mountains, ears flicking, as if he heard something Noah couldn't. What is it, boy? Noah asked, brushing frost from his eyelashes. The horse stamped once, nostrils flaring. Another gust shook the roof, and Noah felt the boards shiver under his boots. The world outside was white noise, nothing but wind and darkness. He stayed there for hours, feeding the lantern, rubbing Ashen's neck, whispering nonsense just to fill the silence. Through the storm's howl, he thought he heard another sound. A woman's voice, soft and distant, carried through the valley like a memory. For a second, even Ashen froze, ears straining toward the wind. When it passed, the horse lowered his head, pressing it gently against Noah's chest. The warmth of that weight, the pulse under the skin, was the only real thing left in the world. Maybe she's still out there, Noah whispered. Maybe that's what he hears. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the valley buried and quiet. The sun broke pale over the ridge, painting the snow in hues of gold. Noah stepped outside, his eyes stinging from the light. Elias Brandt's wagon tracks cut through the drifts toward town, sharp and solitary. The sight filled Noah with something heavier than anger. Pity, maybe. The kind of sorrow that can't be fixed. Back in the barn, Ashen stood perfectly still, steam rising from his coat. Noah ran a hand down his neck, whispering, "He can't hurt you now." The horse flicked an ear, then turned his head, brushing Noah's sleeve again. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly. More like agreement. Two survivors acknowledging the storm had passed for now, though they both knew others would come. Noah looked out across the glittering white fields. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the wind was still moving through the trees, carrying with it the ghost of a woman's laughter and the echo of a man's regret. He didn't yet understand how those echoes would soon return to them both. But in that brief morning calm, standing beside the horse that had once been hated, Noah felt the first fragile stirring of purpose, the will to protect what the world had already given up on. The storm left behind a world too quiet, as if the wind had taken every sound with it. Snow covered the valley in smooth, endless white. Fences, trees, even the small road that wound toward Jackson Hollow had vanished. The silence pressed against the cabin like a held breath. Inside, the fire burned low, and Noah sat by the window, watching light creep slowly across the snowdrifts. Each morning felt the same. Gray dawn, a few hours of pale sun, then darkness again. Ashen had recovered some strength since the storm, though his gait was still uneven. The salve Ben Harper had given them worked better than Noah expected. When the boy rubbed it into the old scar, the horse no longer flinched. He just stood there, steady, eyes half closed, trusting. That trust, quiet as it was, had become the center of Noah's days. His mother slept more now, her cough growing softer but deeper, the kind of sound that told him the sickness was stealing her from the inside. He tried not to think about it. Work helped, repairing the roof, chopping what wood he could find beneath the snow, mending harnesses too worn to sell. But some nights, when the moon rose bright over the frozen hills, he would go out to the barn just to listen to Ashen breathe. That sound, slow, sure, was proof that something still lived. By mid-February, the cold began to bite harder. The creek froze solid, and Noah had to melt snow for water. He fed Ashen by hand, rationing each flake of hay. He'd stopped going into town. Too many eyes watched him now. Brant's men had seen Elias leave the valley furious after their last encounter, and gossip ran wild through every saloon and store. "The Carter boy thinks he's some kind of savior," they said, "taking care of a ghost horse." Others whispered worse, that Noah was stealing from the Brants, or worse, that he was touched in the head. Noah learned to move quietly. He gathered feed from the edge of the old mill, broken bales left to rot. Each trip risked frostbite, but he did it anyway. He never told his mother. She asked once, weakly, "Does he still follow you?" He smiled and said yes, though the horse hadn't walked far since the storm. Then one morning he woke to a strange stillness. Not the calm of snow, but something heavier. When he stepped outside, the air was thick with fog, the kind that muffles every sound. Ashen was standing near the fence, his head turned toward the ridge. Noah followed his gaze. Far in the distance, across the frozen slope, something dark moved. A lone rider making his way down the pass. The fog thinned just enough for Noah to recognize the silhouette. Ben Harper's oak cane glinted once in the pale light. Relief spread through him like warmth. He ran to meet the old man halfway up the hill. You look half-starved, Ben said, swinging down from the mule. I figured you'd need supplies. He carried a small pack, flour, dried beans, a coil of rope, a jar of salve. Word's gone around town that Elias is fixing to send his men this way. He's had too much whiskey and not enough mercy. Noah's stomach tightened. He won't touch Ashen. Ben studied the boy's face. He'll try, son. Men like him always try. He paused, running a calloused hand through his beard. If you want to keep that horse, you'll have to be smarter than your pride. Noah looked toward the barn, where Ashen's breath drifted in the cold air. I'm not giving up on him. Ben nodded slowly. Then you better make peace with the cost. They worked together through the afternoon, repairing the fence and patching holes in the roof. Ben hummed old tunes under his breath, songs that sounded like prayers more than music. When they were done, he reached into his coat and handed Noah a small brass token, worn smooth by time. What's this? Noah asked. Mountain Rescue Emblem, Ben said. I carried it for 30 years. Give it to him. He nodded toward Ashen. He's earned it more than I ever did. That night, after Ben left, Noah sat in the barn beside the lantern. The light painted Ashen's coat in shades of copper and gray. Carefully, Noah tied the token to the ribbon still looped around the halter. The metal caught the glow, flickering like a tiny star. You remember, don't you? He said softly. You remember her? You remember what you tried to do? Ashen's ear twitched. He stepped forward until his muzzle rested against Noah's hair. The boy closed his eyes, letting that warmth soak through the chill. Days passed. The fog lifted, replaced by brittle sunlight, but the air carried tension, like a storm waiting to be born. Noah felt it every time he walked into town, every time a door closed when he passed. Even the silence at night seemed sharper. One evening, as the sun sank red behind the peaks, Noah led Ashen outside to stretch his legs. The snow crunched under hoof and boot. It was the first time they'd walked beyond the fence in weeks. Ashen limped at first, then steadied, nostrils flaring at the scent of open air. The wind carried a faint echo of something, bells from the church, maybe, or just the sound of the past brushing against the present. They stopped near the ridge, where the valley spread wide and endless below. From there, Noah could see the trail winding down toward the Brandt Ranch. The lights glowed faintly in the dusk. He wondered if Clara was there, if she still thought about the truth they'd shared in that quiet room. Ashen turned his head, ears flicking toward the mountains. For a long moment, they stood side by side in silence, watching night creep in. Then Noah said quietly, "If he comes, we'll face him." Ashen let out a breath that rose white into the fading light. It sounded almost like agreement. When they walked back to the barn, the world was sinking into blue. The token on the halter caught the last glint of sunlight before darkness swallowed it whole. That night, Noah dreamed of the avalanche, the roar of snow, the echo of a woman's voice, and the gray horse fighting through the blinding white. When he woke, the cabin was cold and silent, except for his mother's breathing. Outside, a thin layer of new frost covered the valley, gleaming under a half-moon. The loneliness of winter had settled deep into the land, into the bones of the living, and the ghosts that lingered there. But somewhere inside that silence, Noah felt movement, the faint pulse of something still fighting its way toward spring. He rose quietly, pulled on his coat, and went to the barn. Ashen was waiting, head turned toward the door, as though he'd been listening for him all along. By late February, the sky no longer looked blue. It was the pale color of steel, heavy with snow that refused to fall. The wind had turned cruel again, scraping across the valley like sandpaper. Noah woke to the uneasy stillness that often came before a storm. Even Ashen sensed it. The horse paced in the barn, hooves striking the frozen ground with quiet urgency, his breath hanging thick in the cold. Noah stacked extra wood beside the door, patched the gaps in the roof, and filled every lantern. His mother was weaker now, sleeping longer, her skin pale as the frost that coated the window panes. He sat beside her bed for a while, holding her hand. She opened her eyes once, smiled faintly, and whispered, "You'll be fine, my boy. You've got the heart of your father." He squeezed her hand gently. "Rest, Mama. I'll be back soon." Outside, the wind had begun to howl through the timberline. The air stung like needles. Noah pulled his coat tight and crossed to the barn. Ashen lifted his head when the door opened, ears flicking forward, nostrils flaring. "You feel it too," Noah murmured. "It's coming." By noon, the first snowflakes fell, thick and fast. They didn't flutter. They dove. Within an hour, the world was white. The trees vanished. The fences vanished. Even the sound of the creek disappeared beneath the roar of the storm. Noah tried to shut the barn door, but the wind tore at it, nearly pulling it from the hinges. A noise carried faintly through the gale, the distant, panicked neigh of horses. Noah froze, listening. Then came another sound, faint but unmistakable. A human shout, ragged and desperate, lost in the wind. He turned toward the ridge. Through the blur of snow, he saw movement. A wagon half buried in the drifts, the outline of two horses thrashing against their harnesses. The Brandt wagon. "God help me," Noah whispered. He looked at Ashen, whose head was already raised, muscles taut. "It's them." He grabbed the rope and threw the saddle across Ashen's back. The horse trembled once, then stood still, as if understanding. "You ready?" Noah asked. Ashen snorted, pawing the ground. That was answer enough. They plunged into the white. The cold hit like a wall, slicing through Noah's coat, biting into his fingers. He kept his head low, eyes half closed against the snow. Ashen moved with surprising steadiness, finding footing where Noah couldn't see any. The world was nothing but white and wind and the sound of hooves breaking ice. Halfway up the ridge, the wagon came into view, a dark blur in the storm. One of the horses lay still, buried to its neck in snow. The other thrashed weakly. Noah dropped from the saddle and stumbled forward. "Mr. Brandt!" he shouted. No answer. He pushed through the drift until he reached the wagon door. Inside, two shapes. Elias Brandt slumped against the seat, and beside him, his daughter Clara, her face ghostly pale, hair matted with snow. "Help us!" she gasped when she saw him. Noah climbed up, grabbing her by the arm. "Come on!" She shook her head. "My father. He's unconscious." "I've got him," Noah said. He hauled Elias free, the man's coat frozen stiff, and laid him across Ashen's back. The horse shifted, but didn't flinch. Clara clung to the saddle as Noah mounted behind her. "Hold on tight," he said. "He'll take us home." Ashen turned into the storm, lowering his head against the wind. The climb was brutal. The snow rose to Noah's knees, the air so thick it burned his throat. He could feel Clara shaking in his arms, could feel Elias's weight dragging the saddle down. "Just a little farther, boy," Noah whispered. "Just a little more." Ashen stumbled once, recovered, then pressed on. His legs churned through the drifts like oars through heavy water. At one point, the wind gusted so strong that Noah had to throw his arms around Clara to keep her from slipping off. They couldn't see anything, not even the barn lantern they'd left burning. Only the horse seemed to know where home was. When they reached the lower slope, the snow turned heavier still. It felt like the mountain itself was falling. Ashen slowed, sides heaving, breath coming in thick bursts of steam. Noah leaned forward, speaking close to his ear. "You can do this. You always could." The horse pushed forward, one step at a time, until the faint outline of the cabin emerged through the blizzard. The barn roof sagged under the weight of snow, but it was there, a shape of safety in the white. Noah dismounted, half carrying Clara toward the door. "Inside," he shouted. "There's fire." She stumbled in, dragging her father with her. Noah turned back for Ashen. The horse stood a few yards away, chest rising and falling, eyes glazed with exhaustion. He tried to step forward but faltered, sinking to one knee. "No!" Noah ran to him, pulling at the reins. "Don't you quit on me now!" Ashen's ear flicked toward his voice, and somehow he rose. One trembling step, then another. By the time they reached the barn, Noah's legs were numb, his lungs raw from cold. He led the horse inside and shut the door against the wind. The storm howled outside, rattling the walls. Inside, the world was reduced to firelight and breath. Clara crouched by the hearth, holding her father's hand, tears streaking her face. Elias stirred once, muttering something Noah couldn't catch. Noah knelt beside Ashen, rubbing warmth into the horse's neck. The gray coat was soaked and trembling, but the eyes, those deep, defiant eyes, were still bright. "You did it," Noah whispered. "You brought them home." Ashen exhaled a long, shuddering breath, the sound deep and human somehow. Then he lowered his head until his muzzle touched Noah's shoulder. They stayed that way for a long time, the storm raging outside, the fire crackling low inside. By morning, the wind had stopped. The world outside was silent, buried under drifts taller than a man. Noah stepped out to look, his face stung by the cold. The valley was still and white, untouched but for one trail of hoofprints leading down from the ridge. When he turned back toward the cabin, Clara stood at the doorway, her father behind her, pale but awake. "You saved us," she said softly. "You and him." Noah glanced at Ashen, who stood quietly in the barn light, steam rising from his coat. "He saved us all," Noah said. Elias's voice cracked as he spoke. "That horse," he stopped, his throat working. "That horse did what I couldn't." Noah didn't answer. The truth hung in the still air like smoke, simple, undeniable. Ashen lifted his head, one ear turning toward the sound of the wind dying over the ridge. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a pale gold light across his coat. For that single moment, the world felt alive, again. When morning came, the valley no longer groaned beneath the wind. It lay still and breathless, covered in a white so bright it hurt to look at. The storm had left behind an eerie calm, the kind that makes the heart listen harder, unsure if peace or sorrow will follow. Noah stood outside the barn, snow up to his knees, the cold burning through his coat. Behind him, smoke drifted from the cabin chimney. Life, fragile but steady, was still there. Inside, the warmth of the hearth painted the walls in amber. Clara knelt beside her father, wrapping a fresh bandage around his hand. Elias sat stiffly, eyes unfocused, his skin gray under the firelight. He hadn't spoken much since they were found in the snow. Now he stared into the flames, jaw working like he was fighting something heavier than pain. Noah stayed by the window, his back to them, watching the slow drift of smoke outside. Clara glanced at him once, then looked away, her lips parting as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find words. It was Ashen who broke the silence. A low nicker came from the barn, muffled through the boards. Elias flinched, his hand tightening around the blanket. Clara looked at her father. "He's still here," she said softly. Elias didn't answer. He kept his gaze on the fire. "He shouldn't be." Clara's voice trembled. "He saved us, Father. You know that." Elias stood suddenly, the blanket falling to the floor. "He should have saved her." The air in the cabin turned thin, brittle. Noah turned from the window. "He tried," he said. "Ben Harper told me what happened. The horse went back for her until he nearly froze to death." Elias's head snapped toward him. For a moment, the anger in his face looked like a man fighting ghosts. Then something broke. His shoulders slumped, the heat draining from him all at once. "I saw him when they brought him down from the mountain," he whispered. "Half dead. I told them to take him away. I couldn't stand to look at him. Not because he failed me, son, but because he didn't. He kept coming back, and all I could see was the thing that carried my wife farther away." He sank into the chair again, hands shaking. "I hated him because I couldn't hate myself." Clara moved to him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Noah stayed where he was, silent, letting the words settle like dust. When the sun rose higher, he went to the barn. The snow outside gleamed under the light, blinding in its beauty. Inside, Ashen stood quietly, wrapped in an old blanket, his breath rising in calm, even bursts. Noah brushed frost from the horse's mane. "We made it through," he murmured. "All of us." Ashen's ear flicked toward his voice. The door creaked behind him. Elias stepped inside, shoulders hunched under his coat. For a moment he simply watched. The boy, the horse, the soft rhythm between them. Then he moved closer, each step slow, deliberate. The air was sharp with the scent of hay and cedar oil. Ashen turned his head slightly, one cloudy eye meeting the man's gaze. Elias stopped just short of reaching distance. His breath came rough. "I never thanked you," he said. Noah shook his head. "You don't have to." But Elias stepped closer anyway, lifting a trembling hand to rest against Ashen's neck. "I do," his voice cracked. "For saving her daughter. For saving me." Ashen didn't flinch. He simply stood there, breathing steady, his warmth rising into the space between them. For a long while, none of them spoke. The only sound was the gentle rasp of fingers against fur, forgiveness passing quietly from one soul to another. When Elias finally pulled his hand away, he looked older, but lighter. "He deserves better than a broken stall," he said. "If you're willing, you can keep caring for him, here, at the ranch." Noah hesitated, searching the man's face for a trick. There was none, just exhaustion, and something that looked like peace trying to find its way back home. Thank you, Noah said, his voice quiet but steady. Elias nodded, then turned toward the door. Come spring, this place will need fixing. Roof leaks, fences down. You'll help me with that. I will. The man paused, hand on the frame. Good. He looked back once, his eyes softening as they fell on Ashen. I think she'd have liked you, boy. Both of you. Then he stepped out into the snow, the door swinging shut behind him. Noah stood there for a while, listening to the echo of the man's footsteps fade into the white. When he turned back, Ashen was watching him. Looks like we're not done yet, he said with a small smile. That night, Clara cooked what little they had left, beans and cornbread, sweetened with a drop of honey she found in the pantry. The three of them ate in quiet, the kind of silence that no longer felt heavy. Every now and then, Elias would glance toward the window, where the faint glow from the barn lantern flickered like a heartbeat. When the dishes were cleared, Clara handed Noah a folded piece of paper. My mother's journal, she said. I found it years ago, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. Maybe you should. Noah turned it over in his hands. The edges were worn soft, the ink faded almost to gray. He didn't read it then. He waited until the house was quiet, then took it to the barn. Under the lantern's glow, he opened to the first page. The writing was neat, steady, written in a hand full of grace. Stormlight has the kindest eyes. He doesn't run from the wind. He listens to it. Some days I think he carries my heart where mine can't go. Noah stopped there, unable to read further. He looked up at the horse standing before him, that same calm presence, that same quiet heart. He closed the journal gently. She was right, he whispered. You listen. Ashen stepped forward, resting his head against Noah's shoulder. The boy reached up, hand pressing to the warm, living heartbeat beneath that gray coat. Outside, dawn was beginning again, pale light spilling across a world wiped clean by snow. The wind had changed, softer now, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of spring. By the time March came, the snow had begun to loosen its grip on the valley. Streams trickled again beneath the ice, whispering through the meadows as if the earth was learning to breathe after a long silence. The sky no longer hung low with gray clouds. Instead, faint streaks of blue appeared, pale and hesitant. In that soft thaw, the Brandt Ranch began to move again. Fences repaired, roofs patched, life quietly returning where months of cold had buried it. Noah stayed on to help. He fixed stalls, mended harnesses, and rebuilt the broken gate behind the barn. Elias gave few instructions, but he was often there, watching from the porch with a distant look that wasn't quite sorrow anymore. The bitterness in him had softened, worn down by exhaustion and by the sight of his daughter and the boy working side by side in the fields. Clara's laughter came more easily now. Sometimes Noah caught himself listening for it, even when she wasn't near. Ashen moved slower these days. The long winter had taken its toll. His stride shorter, his breathing deeper, labored at times. Still, when Noah approached, the horse's ears pricked, that single good eye bright with a quiet alertness. They had settled into a rhythm. Mornings spent grooming, evenings walking by the creek where the ice melted in slow veins of silver. Each gesture between them was wordless, but full of understanding. One afternoon, while Noah brushed the dust from Ashen's mane, Elias approached with something in his hands. This belonged to her, he said, holding out a leather bridle, darkened by years of use. The brass buckles had dulled, but the initials EB were still carved faintly into the strap. Noah hesitated before taking it. "You sure you want me to?" Elias nodded. She'd have wanted it that way. His gaze fell on the horse. "That animal carried her more miles than I ever did. When she died, I couldn't forgive either of us. But I think maybe forgiveness finds its own way." He turned to leave, but his hand lingered on the doorframe. "When spring settles, I'll open the south pasture. Let him roam where the grass grows high. He deserves that much." Noah swallowed hard. "He'll like that." Elias didn't look back. "So will you." As the days warmed, the valley transformed. The snow melted from the ridges first, revealing black soil rich and wet. Wildflowers began to push through the thawing ground, small, fragile things that bowed under the weight of dew. Noah watched it all with quiet awe, as if the world was showing him something he had forgotten to believe in. Sometimes, when the sun dipped low and the sky turned gold, Clara joined him at the fence line. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. She often brought an apple from the kitchen and held it out for Ashen, who took it with surprising gentleness. Once, she turned to Noah, the light catching her hair like a halo. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked. He considered the question. "I used to. Not anymore." "Why?" He looked toward the barn, where Ashen stood framed in the doorway, tail flicking lazily. "Because everything I was looking for was right here. I just didn't know it." Clara smiled then, a small, unguarded thing. "You sound like my mother. She said this land gives back what we give it, even if it takes years." Their hands brushed as they leaned on the fence. Neither pulled away. A few nights later, Noah woke to the sound of hooves outside. He threw on his coat and stepped into the cool night. The stars were bright, scattered across the sky like salt. Ashen stood in the field, restless, pawing at the ground. When Noah approached, he saw the tremor running through the horse's body, subtle but steady. "Hey," he whispered, touching the gray neck. "Easy now." Ashen turned his head, pressing his muzzle against Noah's chest, the breath warm but unsteady. The boy felt the rhythm, too fast, uneven. A chill passed through him that had nothing to do with the night air. He stayed beside the horse until dawn, whispering, stroking, waiting for the tremors to fade. When the sun finally rose, Ashen stood calmer, though the weariness in his body was unmistakable. Noah leaned his forehead against the horse's, murmuring, "You don't owe anyone anything, you hear me? You already gave more than most ever could." Later that day, Ben Harper came riding up from town, his mule coated in dust. "Heard the valley's waking up," the old man said, grinning. "Figured I'd check if you two were still in one piece." Noah smiled faintly. "Mostly." Ben's eyes flicked to the horse. The grin faded. "He's getting old, son. Too old to fight off time." "I know." Ben laid a hand on Noah's shoulder. "Don't let it break you when it happens. Some endings are just nature's way of saying it's time to rest." That evening, the three of them, Noah, Clara, and Elias, sat outside by the fire pit. The night air smelled of pine smoke and thawing earth. Elias told stories about the early days of the ranch, of the woman he'd loved and lost, his voice rough but clear. Clara listened with her head on her knees, smiling through tears. When the fire burned low, Noah rose and walked to the barn. Inside, the lantern light flickered over Ashen's coat. The horse was lying down, eyes half closed. Noah knelt beside him, running a hand through the soft gray mane. "You can rest now," he whispered. You did what you were meant to do. Ashen opened his eyes once, as if to acknowledge the words, and let out a slow breath that seemed to carry the weight of years. Noah sat there long after the sound faded, listening to the rhythm of the wind outside, the world turning quietly toward morning. When the first light touched the mountains, Ashen stirred, struggling to stand. Noah helped him, bracing his shoulder beneath the horse's neck. For a moment they stood together, man and animal, facing the sunrise. The air shimmered gold across the field, catching on the brass token still tied to the halter. "You're free now," Noah said softly. "But don't you go just yet." Ashen flicked his ear, as if he'd heard and understood. Then he took one slow step toward the open pasture, the grass wet beneath his hooves, and the sun climbed higher over the ridge. The boy stood watching until the gray form blurred with the light. Only then did he realize his hands were trembling. Not from cold, but from the fragile ache of knowing love and loss had become the same thing. The first snow of spring came without warning, light, delicate, and fleeting. It wasn't the cruel snow of winter storms, but the kind that falls like memory, dissolving the moment it touches the earth. Noah stood at the edge of the pasture, watching it drift across the grass, the flakes melting on his skin. The air was still, the world hushed in that rare hour between seasons, when even the wind seems to listen. Ashen stood by the oak tree, his body thinner now, his movements slow and careful. The weeks had softened him, and his breath came shorter, but there was a calm about him, an unspoken readiness. The brass token on his halter caught the pale sunlight, flashing briefly before fading again. Noah walked toward him, the snow crunching softly under his boots. "You picked a fine day to stand out here," he said, his voice gentle, teasing. Ashen turned his head slightly, the one clear eye meeting Noah's with that familiar, quiet recognition. Noah placed a hand on his neck. "I guess you always liked the cold better than the heat." Clara appeared behind him, carrying a wool blanket. "Your mother's inside," she said softly. "She's asking for you." Noah nodded. "I'll come soon." Clara hesitated, her gaze flicking to Ashen. "He's getting weaker." "I know. Do you think he's in pain?" Noah shook his head. "No, I think he's just letting go." They stood together for a while, watching the horse breathe in the thin light. The snow settled gently on his back, on his gray mane, on the ground beneath his hooves. Clara slipped her arm through Noah's, resting her head briefly against his shoulder. "He gave this place back its heart," she whispered. Noah's throat tightened. "He gave me mine." That night, the air turned sharp again. A thin frost glazed the windows of the cabin. Noah sat beside the fire, his mother's hand in his. She looked frail, her hair silver against the pillow. Still, her eyes were steady. "You did right by that animal," she said, "and by yourself." He smiled faintly. "He did more for me than I ever could for him." Outside, a low sound drifted through the dark, the slow, rhythmic stamp of hooves against frozen earth. Noah froze, listening. The sound came again, softer this time, like a farewell whispered through wood and wind. He rose and stepped into the night. The moon hung low over the ridge, lighting the valley in shades of blue and silver. The barn stood open, its lantern flickering weakly. Ashen lay near the doorway, his legs folded beneath him, head resting on the straw. His eyes followed Noah as he knelt beside him. "Hey," Noah said quietly. "You don't have to fight anymore." He stroked the horse's muzzle, feeling the slow rhythm of each breath. "You remember that first night?" he murmured. "Everyone laughing, me scared half to death. You looked at me like you knew something I didn't." Ashen's breath shuddered. His ear twitched once. Noah leaned closer, forehead against the horse's neck. "You were right," he whispered. "You knew we'd save each other." Clara found him there an hour later. The lantern burned low, the barn filled with a stillness too deep to name. Ashen lay motionless, his head resting in Noah's lap, his body warm but unmoving. The ribbon on his halter had fallen loose, half buried in straw. She knelt beside them, touching Noah's shoulder. "He's gone?" He nodded, his eyes fixed on the still form before him. He waited for the snow. They buried Ashen beneath the oak tree at the edge of the pasture. The ground was cold, but the frost had loosened just enough to yield. Elias joined them, silent, his hat held against his chest. When the last of the dirt was patted down, he stepped forward, laying the brass token on the grave. "For a life that carried more weight than most men ever will," he said quietly. Clara placed the faded ribbon beside it. Noah added a smooth stone from the creek, tracing its edge before setting it down. Then the three of them stood in silence, the wind moving softly through the branches above. Days turned into weeks. The thaw came in earnest, melting the snow from the hills, filling the streams until they sang again. Noah threw himself into work, helping Elias rebuild the old barn, clearing the north pasture, teaching the younger colts to follow the rope without fear. The rhythm of labor steadied him, though sometimes, when dusk settled and the sky went gold, he would catch himself looking toward the oak, expecting to see a flicker of gray among the trees. One evening, Clara found him there. "You can still hear him, can't you?" she asked. Noah smiled softly. "Every night. It's not sound exactly, more like the space he left behind." She stepped closer, slipping her hand into his. "He's still here, Noah. Not just in this place. In you." He turned to her then, and for the first time since that long winter, his smile reached his eyes. Then maybe he was right about second chances. As spring unfurled across the valley, wildflowers began to bloom around the oak. Their roots twined through the soil that held Ashen's rest, blossoms rising where once there had been only snow. Noah built a small wooden marker, carving the words carefully into the grain. Ashen, the one who returned. Each morning, he passed the spot before work, touching the top of the marker with a hand that no longer trembled. He never spoke aloud, but sometimes, when the wind shifted, it carried a faint sound from the pasture, a soft rhythm, steady and sure, like hooves against the earth. That summer, Elias opened a new sign on the front gate. "Rescue Barn, for those worth saving." Children from nearby farms came to learn how to ride and care for horses, each one hearing the story of the gray horse who refused to give up. Noah taught them gently, his patience shaped by everything Ashen had given him. On the first snow of the next winter, Noah stood beneath the oak once more. The wind whispered through the bare branches, carrying the scent of cedar and cold air. He closed his eyes, breathing it in. "Thank you," he said simply. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a hawk cried. a sound sharp and clean against the sky. Noah smiled, turning back toward the house, the fields stretching out behind him, the future unfolding ahead. The past no longer felt like a weight. It was a compass, pointing him home. As he walked away, the snow began to fall again, soft and quiet, erasing his footprints but leaving one clear trail behind. Faint hoofprints pressed into the white, leading toward the horizon until they disappeared into light. If this story touched your heart, tell me with just a few words down below. Maybe a simple, "I'm here," or "I remember." Your thoughts mean more than you know. Don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories waiting, quiet and true, about people and the animals that saved them in ways words can't explain.